Morning, folks. Thanks for joining. Thanks for dropping in your introduce yourself in the chat. Really appreciate it. We're going to get going in just a few minutes here. So thanks again for participating in this regional convening on homelessness.
Mayor Hancock, I just wanted you to know that your mic is not muted.
Okay, thank you.
Terrific. So thanks again for folks dropping your info in the chat. We've got a poll going. It looks like Jefferson County is in the lead so far on their representation on this morning's call. So we'll get going in just a few minutes. I'll be helping to facilitate today's call, but we're going to get going in just a few minutes with introductions from Dr. Matt Meyer with MDHI. And for folks who are asking in the chat on where this is being live streamed, this is available on the Facebook Live for the Metro Denver Homeless Initiative on their Facebook page. All right, so it looks like we've got the poll wrapped up. If anybody hasn't yet participated in that, please do so, just so we can get a little friendly rivalry here. But it does look like we've got Adams County and Jefferson County who have got the best representation on this call. It's really exciting to see so many folks from across the Denver metro region participating in this event. So just we're going to get going in just a few minutes, and I'll go ahead and run us through the agenda first. So really quickly, we're gonna be running, so this is a Zoom webinar. So for folks who are joining who are not panelists, you're gonna be muted, but please feel free to use the Q&A function. If you have questions, that'll go directly to the panelists. And then also please feel free to use the chat function to introduce yourself, but for the most part, I'll do my best to moderate that chat and direct any questions to the relevant panelists. We'll make sure we get you a good response. So really quickly on the agenda. So first we're gonna have Dr. Matt Meyer kicking us off. Then we're gonna hear from Denver Mayor Michael Hancock. We're gonna hear from the folks from Built for Zero and Community Solutions. Then we're gonna hear from Mayor John Giles on a regional approach to addressing homelessness based on the experiences of Mesa, Arizona. We're going to talk about Dr. Jamie Reif is going to talk about a state of homelessness and how we look at folks experiencing homelessness. Allison George with the Division of Housing is going to talk about building a foundation for regional collaboration. Then we're going to hear a veteran case study from Missy Mish with the Veterans Administration. We're going to have a Q&A for about 10 minutes and then a break from 9:50 to 10 o'clock. So just mark that. If folks need to use the restroom, head out, stretch your legs, that'll be the time that we'll be taking that break. Then we're going to hear about why Built for Zero works from Leslie Wise with Community Solutions. Why we're going to be starting with veterans. I know it's a question a lot of folks have of why veterans. And so we're going to be doing that at about 10:15. Then we're going to talk about next steps after we, close out this regional convening. What do we do next? Dr. Mayor Olson from Inglewood is going to talk about working together and taking a pledge to really address this on a regional level. And then we're going to have closing remarks at about 11:15. So I'll be our sort of timekeeper. I'll help facilitate today. My goal is to have us wrapped up and done by around a little before 11:30. So I'll be popping in and out on video, but for the most part, you'll just hear my voice and I'll try and keep us rolling. But at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Matt Meyer.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our regional convening on homelessness. Today, all 7 counties and over 25 cities are represented throughout the 7-county Metro Denver region, along with many of our state elected officials and members of Congress. Also joining us are numerous agencies and organizations who have been critical partners in this work, including the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness, the Colorado Department of Healthcare Policy and Finance, the Office of Behavioral Health, the Department of Housing, the Colorado Department of Education, the Metro Mayor's Caucus, and many others. We appreciate you taking the time today to be with us virtually. For the public and press joining us on our Facebook page, thank you for your interest in this pressing issue and your desire to learn more. And lastly, but most importantly, for all of those joining us who are currently unhoused or who face losing a safe place to call home, today is about us working together to better serve you. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought into sharp focus the inequities inherent in homelessness. It's highlighted the overrepresentation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, our BIPOC communities, among our nation's unhoused. It's created a historic awareness and urgency among our communities to address this longstanding and an urgency that cannot and should not be ignored. Over the past few years, numerous organizations have been a part of creating the foundation upon which we hope to build today. Our region's service and housing providers work tirelessly every day to help create safety, stability for those among us who are unhoused. We are incredibly grateful for their determination and efforts when faced with such seemingly insurmountable tasks, confined by their resource restrictions, the growing number of people experiencing homelessness, and the COVID-19 pandemic. From the very beginning, philanthropic partners such as Mile High United Way and the Denver Foundation have supported this work, and others like the Community First Foundation and Kaiser Permanente have joined in. The Metro Mayor's Caucus has been a key rallying partner with elected officials around this issue and helping bring resources to our region. Without these types of existing partnerships and collaborations, this convening would not be possible. Homelessness is a large, complex issue. It's also a solvable one. There are workable solutions. We're gathered to share with you what those solutions are and how we can plan locally, meeting the unique needs of each of our communities while coordinating regionally through data-informed decision-making. One of the ways that we can coordinate regionally on a response to homelessness is around the Built for Zero framework. Today, you'll hear from our colleagues at the National Nonprofit Community Solutions, the architects of the Built for Zero framework, along with our partners at the Colorado Department of Local Affairs, Veterans Affairs, and from several key elected officials who believe this regional coordination is critical in creating an equitable response to homelessness. Each of these partners has worked to make today possible and is united in the belief that homelessness is solvable. You'll see how other cities are making measurable reductions in homelessness through the Built for Zero framework, learn how the years of planning has brought us to this point, understand why the region is starting by targeting our veterans, and learn how you can support this ongoing work through a well-defined structure and feedback loop. Today is not just a convening. Rather, it is part of a pledge to long-term meaningful collaboration across the sectors to address homelessness. Built on a foundation that is years in the making, we have a lot of exciting ground to cover. While the virtual environment can be a limiting one, we will work to keep you engaged throughout the next few hours. Today, you'll hear from our colleagues at Community Solutions on the groundbreaking work of Built for Zero. Mayor John Giles of Mesa, Arizona, will share with you the impact of a regional strategy grounded in data-driven decision-making and the impact it's had in Maricopa County. MDHI will share with you the current state of homelessness in our region, and the Department of Local Affairs will talk about the foundation that has been laid over the past few years and the importance of regional coordination on the issue of homelessness. The VA will join us to share the story of one veteran family who experienced homelessness not once, but twice, and their journey throughout our region that eventually led them to permanent housing. Community Solutions will then provide further details on the Built for Zero framework, why it's successful, and how it can be powerful in creating meaningful reductions in homelessness, beginning with veterans, which will segue into the VA sharing the current status of reductions in our region and the resources that will make these efforts successful. Towards the end of the agenda, we will unveil the carefully constructed structure to meaningfully move this work forward in coordination with Dr. Cog and other local partners. At the end of today, Mayor Olson from Inglewood will be asking you to join your fellow elected officials in pledging support for our regional coordination to maximize our impact, our resources, and our outcomes on homelessness. We hope that you'll join your fellow elected officials in this pledge and help to share your commitments to this critical issue of homelessness. Again, thank you for your time and your support as we work together on solutions that work to end homelessness.
Thanks so much, Matt. We really appreciate you getting us kicked off. So next, I'm going to turn over to Denver Mayor Michael Hancock. Mayor?
Thank you, Zach, and to Dr. Meyer, thank you as well. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank everyone who is here for being a part of this very important conversation in the life of our region. I want to start by really giving homage and honor to the late Mayor of Aurora, Steve Hogan, current Mayor Mike Kaufman, and Lakewood Mayor Adam Paul, who were a part of a conversation that I was honored to be a part of to think about how we can work regionally to address the issue of homelessness. Every one of us, just like you on this call, had the challenges and the real desire to address the challenges of homelessness at the top of our minds, recognizing that these are our neighbors, recognizing that this is our humanity, and recognizing that every time we see someone who is homeless, or we are serving someone who's homeless, it really represents a market failure in our communities. And so I am grateful that we're all convening today. This is a convening that I have looked forward to for quite some time, to have a conversation about our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness and how we can work more collaboratively as a region to really address their challenges and to help move them to a greater level of stability in our communities. Let me just share with you one thing that I really believe, that the more we act unilaterally or within our boundaries to address homelessness, the more we are wasting valuable resources. I think coming together collaboratively as a region to address these issues really gives us an opportunity to be more efficient with the resources, the limited resources that we have. Whether it is the services that we need to use to connect people to get to have their needs addressed, or the housing that is so critical, the shortage of housing. Homeless individuals who I've had conversations with don't acknowledge boundaries. They're really simply trying to find a safe, peaceful place in which to coexist, an opportunity to be lifted up out of the condition in which they are. in. And if they are not seeking that, then typically there's something mitigating that is contributing to that. So we understand the real complex nature of our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness. This is without question the most complex public policy issue I have ever faced. But I know together as a region, we can get on and can be more effective in addressing this. I want to share with you Denver's commitment. We have now made, through the generosity of the people of Denver, a commitment to dedicate part of our sales tax collection to serving those who are experiencing homelessness in our city, to connect them with services, to expand our ability to really address these challenges. And we want to partner with our regional partners so that we can be even more efficient with those resources, but also to share some of the best ideas. So I want you to know we're at the table. The reality is that we have to face the uncomfortable truth about the challenges of homelessness in our society. The same truths underlying the challenges that come with income inequality, quite frankly, the hollowed out middle class, alarming disparity in access to opportunity, and the challenges of mental health and poverty. And I will even broadly say this even more broadly, of course, behavioral health, other behavioral health challenges, including alcohol and drug addictions. Together, I know we can address it. Together, we can be more efficient. And that's why this conversation today, hopefully is a start of something that is phenomenal and even more powerful and helps us to all be better armed to help our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness. So I thank you all for joining us. Denver's in the house. We are proud to be with you and look forward to collaborating with you on this very important topic. Back to you, Zach.
Thanks so much, Mayor. We really appreciate it. All right, so next we're going to hear from Jake McGuire with Community Solutions. Jake, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to be with you, coming to you from Los Angeles, where it's even earlier than it is for all of you. So bear with me as I have my coffee here and keep waking up. I am Jake McGuire from Community Solutions. I'm the co-director of our largest national team, which is called Built for Zero. I want to share with you today a little bit about what we're learning in our work with about 84 communities across the country, including the Metro Denver region, which we're really, really excited to support and partner with through Built for Zero. So if you could advance the slide, please. And one more, maybe. Great. Just want to tell you a little bit about our journey as an organization so you understand who we are. Our work really has kind of covered the gamut of things that you can do as a response to homelessness over the years, as we have been on a journey to sort of learn what it really takes to get to zero in a community. But you know, the largest part of our work was about 20 years in our early history, where we really started as housing developers. We built supportive housing throughout New York City. We built about 3,000 units, more supportive housing than anyone else in the country at the time. And our theory was basically, we all know this is an affordable housing problem. And so if we just build more and more affordable housing, eventually we'll start to see homelessness go down. That housing came with supports. It was best in class, award-winning. The people in that housing did great. They got excellent outcomes. But throughout that time, we weren't seeing homelessness go down in our region. In fact, we were seeing it go up, and quite rapidly. And at some point we had to sort of face into this question, you know, what if we can't just build our way out of this problem? What if housing is an important piece of this problem, but it's not the whole picture? In that time, we sort of really started to lean into the systems that govern access to housing, the systems people have to navigate through, how people access the kind of housing and support that in our communities we're all trying to make available to them. And also what it takes to have line of sight into how well those systems are performing and be able to change them and improve them over time. I'm proud to say that we are now in a position where, as I said, we work with 84 cities across the country. 14 of those communities have now gotten all the way to a measurable zero on either chronic or veteran homelessness. And about half of them, so over 44 of those communities, have now driven a measurable reduction in those populations. We are really, really excited to finally start to see the thing we're really in this to achieve, which is actually getting to zero at a population level across our communities. And that's our hope in Metro Denver, is that all of us here today can work together to support that kind of outcome here as well. Before we advance to the next slide, I want to preface this presentation by saying that as elected officials, as public officials, I think you have a problem. And the problem is that, like it or not, you are held accountable for this problem, even though you don't control a lot of the meaningful levers that it would take to really make inroads on it. And that is why collaboration is so important. So I want to talk about accountability in 3 ways and how you're sort of hamstrung in each of those 3 ways. And then I want to talk about what we think some of the solutions to those problems are. So if you can move to the next slide, please. Great. This one I think will look familiar to a lot of you if you spent some time with it, which is that you're held accountable for a problem you don't actually have clear authority over. And you're not alone, actually. No one has clear authority in most communities over the problem of homelessness. It's no one's job in most communities to solve this problem. So this is just kind of a quick map of all of the different agencies, public, nonprofit, different service providers that are sort of responsible for some piece of homelessness, responding to this problem in some way in most communities. And you'll recognize a lot of them. The continuum of care, which plays such an important role in planning a regional response and administering HUD dollars. But there's a lot of actual money on the table that doesn't flow through the COC, right? VA money, housing authority money, city and county money. Then you have your homeless service providers, your housing providers, your city and county leaders. That's all of you, right? Most of these groups don't report to one another. They're all funded with different funding streams, sometimes multiple funding streams each, which means they all have different incentives and different masters to respond to. And so it's very, very difficult for anybody to sort of get enough of the leverage, capture enough of the leverage to really change strategy or enact sort of sweeping policy to solve this issue. Let's take the next slide here. I want to show you another way that you're held accountable for something without the tools you need. You are held accountable for a problem that you don't actually have full line of sight into more often than not. This is a real example from a real community in Los Angeles where I live. What you're looking at is a process map, basically, a map of all the steps that it took in this community at this time for a single veteran who was experiencing homelessness to move from homelessness to permanent housing in this community. We brought 7 different agencies together who each touched a piece or owned a piece of this housing process. And we just asked them to map out this process, the process that they, in theory, control and administer, right? This is their process, they run it. And it took them about 3.5 hours to produce the sort of game of chutes and ladders that you are looking at in front of you. The only person in this room who sort of knew or had some sense of all these different steps was actually the veteran who routinely had to try to navigate this process. And the people who administer this process, when they sort of got this thing together, were sort of shocked to realize that they had built a system that was not only just a mess to make sense of, but completely unnavigable for a vulnerable individual. And I think it won't surprise you that we look at a system like this, and it's sort of not surprising that people don't seem to be able to get all the way through it. They don't seem to end up in housing. And at the end of that, we sort of look at them and say, well, I guess they just don't want help, or I guess they're service resistant, right? When actually it becomes really clear that the problem is us and this maze of a process that you as an accountable leader don't actually have real line of sight into. Let's move to the next slide, please. The last thing I want to show you is I think you are held accountable for a problem that you don't have a feedback loop on. I initially had a image here that I was thinking of showing you, which is a newspaper article from Burlington, Vermont, Chittenden County, Vermont. The headline was this point in time count, right? That I'm sure you're all familiar with. Once a year, your community has to go conduct this sort of anonymous aggregate count of people on the street experiencing homelessness. And the point in time count in that community sort of came back about 11 months after they had gathered that data. So it came back from HUD. And what it showed was an alarming 24% increase in chronic homelessness, 24%. And that community was really, really alarmed by that. They had been doing some good things. They really thought maybe they were making progress. And now the mayor was getting hammered. The county executives were getting hammered, 24% increase. And it sort of drove them to Built for Zero to seek some help. And we started working with them. And the first thing we did was work with them to get to a place where they actually had data on this problem monthly. So in something closer to real time, comprehensively by name, they knew every single individual experiencing homelessness in that community in real time with no gaps in coverage. And I mapped that out over the course of the next year, just month by month. And that's all you're looking at here, month by month, the number of people experiencing chronic homelessness in that community. And what you can see here is this alarming 24% increase, which was sort of at the start over here in December or January, excuse me, of 2019. Well, over the course of the year, just through normal variation in that system, really without changing anything at all about this system, you'd see that number go up or down by as much as a full 23% swing, just depending on when you gathered that information, right? So the normal fluctuation built into that system was as much as 24%, which means that once a year, when they take that point in time count, everybody's basically holding their breath, hoping that they happen to sort of pluck that number out on a month when that number is low instead of when that number is high. But actually, that number isn't telling you anything about any kind of durable change in that system. And so you are the ones who are then held accountable for that number, even though you don't have a meaningful feedback loop that you can use throughout the year to understand whether or not the things that you're doing are working. So we all know to solve this problem, it takes more affordable housing. It takes greater investment in services. Of course, those things are true. You all have done a lot of that work. The new stimulus acts have produced some new money that's going to be coming into your communities. But we know we'll probably need more. But what I want to suggest to you is to be accountable for this problem takes more than just resources. It actually takes, if you'll go to the next slide, an operating system. Next slide, please. An operating system in your community for ending homelessness across your entire community, across your entire region. We think that operating system has 5 pieces. The first is what we're here to talk about today, a shared measurable aim that all those players, you remember that first slide with all those different people on it who touch a piece of this problem, that everybody agrees to be accountable to and to work in pursuit of a shared aim, which is to actually end homelessness in your region. You'd be surprised how often we start working with regions and find that not all the players in that community think that that's what they're there to do. A lot of people say, my job is to end homelessness, but when you talk about how you might agree to measure that, people might measure that in different ways. Or when you talk about if people really believe that's possible, you start to realize that some people just think, I'm here to kind of house the person in front of me, and I'm really not sure we'll ever be able to make progress on this broader population. So can we get everybody to agree to hold ourselves accountable to a shared aim and measure that the same way? And if we can do that, then we can start tracking whether or not the work that we're doing is adding up to the kind of reductions in homelessness we want to see over time. The second thing is this green box, a nimble command center team. Are all those players around the same table integrated in a nimble way so they can take action together on a regular basis? Third, a rapid person-specific feedback loop. Do we have a way of knowing month over month instead of once a year, 11 months later, how we're doing, if the things we're trying are working? I'll show you a little bit more about that in a second. And then finally, these bottom boxes that you all, I think, are probably aware of and probably already passionately committed to, which is, do you have the proven technical strategies to respond to the kinds of problems you might be seeing? These are things like housing first, good, housing-focused street outreach, right? There are technical best practices we know we need to implement. And do you have the flexible housing and service dollars that are both adequate to the scale of your problem, but also that can be moved around and deployed flexibly as your problem shifts and changes over time? So let's look at the next slide here, and I just want to show you what we think this command center sort of looks like in action. When communities participate in Built for Zero, as the Metro Denver region is aiming to do, they commit to a shared aim with all these other communities across the country. And for veterans, which is the group we're really here to talk about, I want you to focus on this top piece of this. We call this functional zero. It's a simple, dynamic way of measuring this very dynamic problem. It basically says, we're not saying no veteran will ever experience a housing crisis ever again, or at least we're not saying that yet, right? Someday we hope we could get there. People may continue over time to fall into homelessness, but at any given time, the total number of veterans experiencing homelessness in your community should be less than or equal to the number of veterans you are routinely proving you can house in permanent housing in a given month. So if on average we're moving 20 veterans into permanent housing every month, then we should never have more than 20 veterans total experiencing homelessness across our region. If we do, then that number is not low enough, and we are obviously not able to keep up with the housing crises that people may start to experience over time. So this definition gets confused a lot. I think it's really important to understand, but it's basically the total number of people in front of you needs to be less than or equal to the total number of people you're confident you can house that month. And that's what you're working toward. And when I say 14 communities across the country have achieved zero, this is the definition I'm talking about. It's an extremely high bar, but it's possible. Let's move to the next slide, please. Communities also commit, as you all are doing, to some shared benchmarks around racial equity and making sure that the housing outcomes that your system is producing are equitable across demographic groups. This includes things like making sure that Black, Indigenous, and other people of color have meaningful decision-making power in your system, that they're reporting positive experiences of their engagement with that system, they're getting their needs met in a timely way that's not re-traumatizing, that you have good data on all folks experiencing homelessness, and that you're not more likely to have gaps for folks who are Black or Indigenous or maybe other groups of color in your community. And finally, that the outcomes your system is producing in terms of housing and retention, returns to homelessness, are equal across those groups. So these are things communities start measuring as well and start to look at and manage to over time. Let's move to the next slide. Great. We talked about that nimble command center team. These are a few of these groups that would need to be together around that table on a regular basis. Usually we see this as at least monthly. Groups are looking at that definition, looking at their data and saying, how much closer did we get to meeting that functional zero definition this month than last month? In other words, do we have fewer veterans experiencing homelessness this month than we did last month? And if not, why is that? And what should we change about our system? We shouldn't keep doing the same thing. We should innovate and figure out what's going wrong. If you move to the next slide, if you want to be able to have that kind of monthly conversation, one more slide over, you need monthly data. You need a rapid by name feedback loop that can tell you month over month how many people are out there. We think this data needs to have 4 key elements. And if you're a mayor or an elected municipal or county official, this is the kind of information you're clamoring for, that you're wanting. Can somebody tell me how we're doing at any given time, right? We think that data should be comprehensive, which means everybody means everybody. We're not missing anyone. We know that if you're on the street, if you're in a shelter, we have awareness of you in a central place with appropriate privacy protections, of course, but that you are known to this whole system so that we can all work together to figure out how to respond to your housing needs. We want that data to be person specific. So it's not enough just to know that a person is out there. We need to know that that person is an individual. They're having a unique experience. Do we know who they are, their history, what they need, what kind of resources they might be eligible for? We want to see that that data is updated monthly, right? So regular updates. And that means if you move from a shelter into housing, we want to know in that database that you're no longer experiencing homelessness, right? If you come back into housing, we want to know not just that you're experiencing homelessness, but that you're experiencing it again, right? That we've actually seen you before and now you're back on our radar. So we want to be able to observe how this picture is moving and changing in real time. And finally, we want to make sure that data is reliable. And we look at that a couple ways quantitatively, but the easiest way to think about this is that it should balance like your checkbook, right? I know we don't use checkbooks anymore, but if you think about your inflow and your outflow from homelessness, the number of people you can count in front of you ought to be predicted accurately by that math. And if it isn't, then you have a data collection or a data reporting error somewhere in that system. Let's move on, please. Great. Communities that have this kind of real-time data instead of just that once-a-year data, and there are 79 communities now across the country that can look at this in real time and make real-time decisions about how they're doing. They have access to 7 key data points that they didn't have access to before. This is data that's going to be stored in your HMIS system, right? So that you can all look at it together. First, they understand their inflow, right? How many people are brand new to homelessness this month? How many people are homeless again, but they've actually returned from housing? So we already helped them and something hasn't worked. And now we maybe need to help respond to that situation again, or hear that lesson that the way we tried to serve them wasn't effective the first time around. And then how many people are people we've seen before, but now they've what we call returned from inactive, which means maybe they sort of went off our radar. They might have resolved their own homelessness for a time. They might have moved away, whatever the reason, now they're back on our screen and we need to be accountable for them again. You also, over at the right side, need to have access to information about your outflow. How many people are moving out of homelessness this month in our community? Whether that's because we've been able to help connect them to permanent housing, or maybe they've sort of moved to that inactive bucket, right? They've moved away, or maybe they've resolved their own homelessness, or maybe they no longer meet the population criteria we thought they did. So we thought they were a veteran, but actually when we started to do research, we realized they're not a veteran. So they're still experiencing homelessness. We need to find a way to support them, but we can maybe move them into a different category and connect them to resources appropriately. When you have this kind of information, you're moving from that once a year snapshot or kind of a photograph that treats homelessness as a static problem that you have to kind of hold your breath and see what happens, to a movie, right? Every month we can see how this problem is moving and changing. We recognize that it's not static, it's dynamic, and our response can now be as dynamic as the problem itself. And as a manager, as a mayor or a county administrator, an elected official, that's the kind of information you want to have, just like the weather report or your jobs numbers or whatever else you would track on a regular basis, so that you can respond in a much more nimble, high-touch way to this problem and manage it down over time. Okay, let's look at the next slide and go one more, please. Great. Yeah, I just want to end with an example of what it looks like to do system level problem solving with this kind of information. I think this is really important. Okay, we've got a shared aim. We've got an integrated team that's at the table. So we've tried to solve that problem of sort of scattered or diffused authority within our communities and also across our region. And now we have real-time person-specific data on every veteran in this community experiencing homelessness. We can see that number moving and changing. Now, what do we do with all of that that's going to help us drive that number down over time? What you're looking at here is just month-over-month data. This is real data from Chattanooga. So a smaller community than Metro Denver, but I chose Chattanooga because it's a regional community just like yours. So it includes the city of Chattanooga, but it also includes a number of surrounding counties. And all told, this is a community, a geographic catchment of about 1 million people. What you're looking at here is their number of veterans experiencing homelessness month over month. As you can see, Chattanooga had kind of these numbers dancing sort of up and down. And then somewhere around January, February 2018, they really started to drive some landlord outreach to try to bring new units online. And they started doing some really deep process improvement work in how their available housing vouchers got leased up. So you remember that chutes and ladders map I showed you? They started to try to tackle that and streamline that and make that faster and easier to navigate and more reliable. And they saw major improvements. So it didn't take in that community a lot of new resources to start to be able to drive that number down pretty significantly. They were leasing up a lot of unused vouchers. In your community, believe it or not, you have unused vouchers. That one of the things you could try to do right now is try to figure out how to lease those up more quickly. But down here around June of 2018, you'll notice that number starts to tick up again. And when they drill down into that information, if you go to the next slide, what they start to see, and don't worry too much about digesting this whole chart, just I'll explain it here, is they start to see that their inflow is going up and their inflow into homelessness is now exceeding their outflow. I want to remind you, if homelessness is going up in your community, it can only ever mean one thing. Your inflow is greater than your outflow, right? That's all that it looks like for homelessness to increase. And all it looks like for homelessness to decrease is your outflow is greater than your inflow. So just remember to think of it that way. But when they drill down into the causes of their inflow, as this Built for Zero kind of data allows you to do, yes, they see a large number of people, 73% of people are brand new to homelessness, people they've never seen before. But a full 26% of the folks coming into homelessness in those months are people that they've already housed and something hasn't worked and now they're back experiencing homelessness. Well, that is about triple the national average. That's a very, very high number, a high percentage of people to have something in your housing process going wrong for, that they're not able to sustain that housing. And the good news is that is a problem you can really call the troops together and think about how to solve. It doesn't take a lot of new resources to figure out what you might do there. So they called all their housing providers together and they said, we've noticed this data. Tell us what you're seeing, what's going on. So now we're moving from this very big idea of homelessness is going up to a smaller problem of inflows going up to an even more specific problem, which is inflow among people we've already housed is going up. And then we're pivoting from that quantitative data point to get some qualitative data underneath that to tell us what's causing, what might be driving that issue. And what they found was their case management ratios were not equalized across their programs. So some of their programs had too much case management, which meant they had really light ratios, and some of their programs in turn had too little, which means single case managers were having to manage lots and lots of people's needs in housing. And the second thing was that a couple of their programs were not implementing technical best practices in housing first to make sure that they could retain people in housing. So they together, working as a system now, instead of just individual programs, rebalance those case management ratios. They said, would you be willing over here to let us move some of these case managers to this program over here to provide more support? Yes, we'd be willing to do that. Would you be willing to do some retraining with us to help your case managers do a better job and adopt best practices in housing? Yes, we'd be willing to do that. And if you move to the next slide, you'll see that not only were they able to get a handle on that new inflow from housing, but this is a photo of that Chattanooga team after they've driven that number back down, continued that reduction. You can see it there going back down in 2018, all the way to functional zero, becoming one of the first large metro areas in the country to be able to end veteran homelessness this way. So I say this not to say that the problems are always simple. In Metro Denver, your problems are complex. We heard from the mayor, this is the most complex public policy issue he has ever dealt with in his career. And I think a lot of us would agree and would say that. But to say that if you have an operating system that can give you line of sight into that complexity in real time, as a team, you can make much, much smarter, more accountable decisions that can help you drive that number down with the resources you have. And where that information starts to reveal the need for new resources, you will be able to know that with much more specificity and stability over time. And we think that can actually improve your advocacy and your ability to do smart resource planning as well. So I'm going to end here because I think I'm a little over time with this final slide, which is what you as elected officials can do. And I hope you'll spend time thinking about this today as you hear some of these presentations. I've just kind of set these things in the context of this operating system. Does your community have a commitment to a shared measurable aim? You're gonna be asked today to commit to this shared aim across the Denver region. How can you use your pulpit as an elected official to set that clear vision? How can you use city funds and contracts and licenses that you control to incentivize people to commit to that aim? A nimble command center team, can you use your convening power as an elected official to get people to the shared table? This rapid by name feedback loop, can you ask for quality data, demand that you have that real-time monthly data? Can you ask to be briefed on that regularly? And the real power move is, would you be willing to just release that information monthly instead of once a year? So you can be in control of this problem and say to the press and your constituents, here's where the number is, it's either up or down, here's why we think that is this month, and here's what we're gonna do about it. And then finally, can you use your convening power, your political authority, and all your city funds or county funds to make sure that you're adopting proven technical strategies and that you're making targeted housing investments that are actually in response to your data so that you can increase the likelihood that you can drive real reductions and real change on this problem. So I want to pause and turn it back over to Zach and the rest of the team. But it's been great to be with you this morning. I'm really excited about the journey that you're on. And I hope this was a helpful window into some of the work that we hope to do together with your community at Built for Zero. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Jake. So next, we are gonna, see how good my my facilitation skills are. We're gonna show a quick video from Mesa, Arizona, Mayor John Giles.
You all. Hello and good morning to you all. I wish I could be with you live today, but I am happy to share some of the story about Mesa, Arizona and how we created momentum and results by working regionally to address homelessness. The way we talk about this in Mesa is not just that homelessness is an issue in the community, it is the issue in the community. Mesa is a compassionate community. I'm very proud to call it my home. That said, and I'm sure you can relate, people don't necessarily agree on how this challenge should be addressed. There's no one solution for this very complex problem. And in times like today, there are more people experiencing homelessness than ever before. So we have a big job. But today I want to talk to you about an initiative that started about 5 years ago after I went on a trip to our nation's capital. It was during that trip that I learned about a national program called the Mayor's Challenge to End Veterans Homelessness. And it was obvious to me that this would be a good fit for my community. We started here in Mesa and quickly realized a regional, data-driven approach is what was needed. Homelessness doesn't have geographic borders. This has to be a regional effort in order to make the biggest impact. I'm here today to share with you some of this story, and I hope that it helps you in the greater Denver area. For those of you who aren't as familiar with Maricopa County and Mesa, let me give you just a quick context of what our region looks like and a little bit about Mesa, Arizona. Maricopa County is the fourth most populous county in the United States. It's over 9,000 square miles with 27 cities and towns. Maricopa County accounts for about 62% of the total population of Arizona. We see approximately 220 people moving into the county every single day. Mesa, my hometown, is the second largest city in the county and the third largest in the state of Arizona, also the 35th largest city in the United States. We're 139 square miles with more than 500,000 residents, and we're one of the fastest growing communities in the nation. We have beautiful weather 2/3 of the year. This is one of the reasons why we're seeing more and more homeless activity in our region. This was always the case, but we see a continuation of that trend as we move towards a post-COVID time period. When it comes to serving our homeless population, both Maricopa County and Mesa started this work with a focus on veterans, although services have expanded to the entire unsheltered population. Let's get into the programs and how our work has evolved. It doesn't happen overnight. Collaboration takes commitment from the top to the bottom levels, and it takes persistence of staff in the field. So here's a little bit about our journey in Mesa. The first is the 100,000 Homes campaign. This is a national campaign that we began to work with back in 2013. The campaign helped Mesa secure and use VASH vouchers. VASH, I'm sure many of you know, stands for Veterans Affairs Support Housing Vouchers. This was a great work and continues today, but it started as a Mesa-based focus only. In 2015, Mesa and the other mayors in our region participated in the Mayor's Challenge to End Veterans Homelessness, which I mentioned earlier. Through the Mayor's Challenge, mayors and other state and local leaders across the county were charged with marshaling federal, local, and nonprofit efforts to end veterans homelessness in our own communities. The end goal being to reach the point where there are no veterans sleeping on our streets and every veteran has access to permanent housing. The efforts of this program ensured that local jurisdictions were doing our part in the regional work already underway. We brought that program back to Mesa as Housing Our Heroes. We've continued to work to ensure that if a veteran becomes homeless, our community will have the capacity to quickly connect them to the help they need and to achieve housing sustainability. Now here's where the power of a regional approach started to take hold. Later in 2015, the region adopted the Built for Zero model. Built for Zero helps us target priority needs via a single by name list. By name lists are very important. I have to recognize Maricopa County and the City of Phoenix for their efforts to build a regional list that we could all share and use together. For years, we were very limited in how much we knew about our homeless population, and this is true for our neighboring cities also. Some limitations were related to reasonable privacy for those experiencing homelessness. We also found ourselves dependent on the annual point-in-time count to gauge the number of unsheltered homelessness. While the point-in-time exercise facilitated at the county level is helpful, it could never successfully capture everything. That said, we use this data and information from the Homeless Management Information System to get a general idea of our homeless population and their geographic locations. Built for Zero is meant to provide next-level data to help us accomplish several things. First, it helps us to better understand community needs and priorities overall. Second, it helps us better understand what is working and how we might need to change or adjust course to better serve. Third, it helps us learn where we need more resources and how best to put those to work. And finally, from my perspective, it helps those of us in leadership roles employ that data to identify ways to help and to inform our directions. Mesa's been humble about our work to support those experiencing homelessness, but we've always had facilities and dedicated funding to support nonprofits serving this population. It's a collaborative effort, both regionally and locally. This next slide is an overview of our region's story and progress. What you're looking at is the number of veterans in Maricopa County who were experiencing homelessness that have been identified, housed, and served in other ways since the year 2017. To date, we've achieved an overall reduction in veterans homelessness of 15%. It isn't as much as we'd like to see, of course, but we're getting there. Over the last few years, we've identified about 90 new homeless veterans each month, and we're housing about 100. This data demonstrates the slow, constant reduction over time. As a team, we continue to closely analyze this data. We look at this data and what we've learned and ask ourselves again, how can we be more effective in helping this population as a region? And for me, again, as mayor, how can I prioritize my efforts and what can I do to help? Now let's look at the intake of veterans in our region as another example. In this slide, you're seeing the intake of veterans experiencing homelessness being identified and referred into our system from 2017 to January of this year. That's the new inflow graph. And the chart on the lower half of the screen is showing how many veterans are returning to homelessness. This is called returned from housed. This is a subset of the data of the inflow chart shown above. Let me share with you some high-level observations by the Built for Zero team. This data has offered us key insights on the impacts of the pandemic. We can see that the eviction moratorium is keeping people in housing as desired. And if we're keeping more of our veterans housed, we see fewer numbers returning to homelessness. This next slide looks at how many veterans we've housed over time. The box shows pre-pandemic and the start of the pandemic. The chart shows that in January of 2021, we housed 54 vets in our region. So we ask ourselves, does this decrease mean we have fewer veterans experiencing homelessness? Is it possible that the emergency interventions by cities and towns have actually helped? But that's not the entire picture. We know we have a limited supply of housing and a limited number of landlords who accept VASH or other vouchers. When those units are staying filled, again partly due to the eviction moratorium, the region doesn't have anywhere to house those who are new to experiencing homelessness. In essence, as a region, we appear to use the existing units cyclically, and they're limited. What we need to do is add more units to our supply. This takes the cooperation of landlords. So again, as mayor, this presents the question of what can I do to help? Together with our City of Mesa staff, we're looking to help grow the number of landlords in Mesa accepting VASH and other voucher programs. As a region, we've learned a lot during COVID. In Mesa, we found that we had a gap in our path to recovery. The first step used to be a shelter. Shelters, for good reasons, have rules and requirements. For some, this creates too high of a barrier to getting on the road to recovery. So we created the Off the Streets program to provide immediate health and safety. It's a pre-shelter experience. The only requirement is that the participants make a commitment to recovery and that they use the time to get started down that path, to be ready to enter a more structured shelter program. I support the continuation of this program as we move out of COVID, and we are hoping to continue it in the long term. These are some of the high-level observations that we're gathering from the data in our region. We'll be looking for opportunities to work with the Built for Zero team to track and further analyze our data. As a result, Mesa is more dedicated than ever to staffing programs and resources to address homelessness. Through lessons learned from partners in the region and the data we've been able to gather, our policies and strategies are evolving and proving to be effective. I look forward to continuing to support this important work, and I invite you to reach out to Mesa if you have questions or as you're considering best next steps for your communities. If we can help you find success and better serve those experiencing homelessness, we would be very happy to do so. Thanks again for the opportunity to share our experience in Mesa.
Okay, so thanks everybody for watching that video. We have a poll coming up that should pop up on your screen in the next minute here, and you can go ahead and click on that. So this is sort of a question that goes back to Jake's presentation on what would not be a source of inflow. And so we'll give it another couple of seconds here, and then while we're having folks answer the polls, we're a few minutes behind on the agenda, but don't worry, we've built in some time, so we're all on track. So our other presenters are in good shape, and should be okay to take a break around 10 o'clock. All right, so yes, so that is the correct answer of folks how are they exiting your homeless system. Folks who are entering emergency shelter are not exiting homelessness, because folks residing in emergency shelter are still experiencing homelessness. All right, so next I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jamie Wright.
Thanks, Zach. I'm here to talk to you a little bit today about data and what we know about people experiencing homelessness and about the state of homelessness in our region. It's a little bit hard to cover in 10 minutes, but I will give you a high level and then talk to you a little bit about resources that are available for you. Next slide, please. Before we dive into that, I just want to make sure we all understand a couple of terms that we'll be using regularly today. You've heard the point in time talked about quite a bit. So that's an unduplicated count of people experiencing literal homelessness on a single night in January. Generally, that's done every year. There are kind of two portions, the sheltered portion, which we do every year, and then the unsheltered portion, which we generally do every year. It is only technically required every other year, but our community has usually done the count every year when it's not COVID conditions. This year, as you know, we didn't believe that we could keep people safe. So we did take advantage of the HUD waiver, similarly to other cities like Atlanta, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and most other large continuums of care used the waiver to not conduct the unsheltered count this year, just because we didn't feel it could be done safely. The next data point that we talk about is data from our homeless management information system. And so we have talked about this already today, but I just want to make sure we have a kind of a working definition of what that means. So that's an information technology system used to collect client level data on things related to housing and services for individuals or families experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. This is really how we get real-time data on people who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness. And then third, we're going to be talking about the McKinney-Vento homeless education data. So that's a count of students identified as meeting the educational definition of homelessness during a given school year. Next slide, please. So late last year, the Metro Denver Homeless Initiative released the State of Homelessness report. And I would encourage you to take a look at it. It's about a 55-page report that kind of unpacks a lot of the data that we know about homelessness in our region. Included in that is data on the point in time count. So that is a single night count. So on a single night on January 27th of 2020, there were 6,104 people experiencing homelessness. The next data point that the report unpacks is our HMIS data. And through that, we actually, for the first time, can get a cumulative count. And what that cumulative count showed us was that between July 1st, 2019 and June 30, 2020, 31,000 people, over 31,000 people accessed resources and supports related to their homelessness across the region. And then similarly, the McKinney-Vento data. So that's, again, the Colorado Department of Education data. In our region alone, there were 12,879 students that were identified as meeting the educational definition of homelessness. Next slide, please. So what did the data show us when we look at all these different sources, kind of put them all together? And I will say this is not an exhaustive list of data. This is just kind of what's in our report. The one thing that no matter what data source you look at is that racial inequity is always consistent. And we're going to unpack that here in a second a little bit, but that is the one thing that just over and over we see. Also, for the first time, we were able to see the magnitude of this issue over the course of an entire year, instead of having to rely on just that one point in time and only being able to know, like Jake said, maybe 11 months later on one night, the number of people experiencing homelessness. The other thing that the data consistently shows us is that the leading causes of homelessness are economic. Next slide, please. So we absolutely cannot have a discussion about homelessness without talking about race. And so this slide, what this shows us is the dark blue line is the racial representation in the general population based on the census data. The kind of mint line is the point in time data from 2020. So what percent of the population that were counted as experiencing homelessness fell within that racial representation. And then the gray line is the kind of a full 2020 count of the people, how people identify that are accessing the HMIS. And so what we know is if you're American Indian or Alaskan Native, you're 7 times more likely to experience homelessness. If you're Black or African American, you're 4.5 times more likely. Next slide, please. So let's talk about what causes homelessness. Again, it's very, very consistent no matter the data source. High housing costs, particularly in our region, is absolutely the largest cause. And we're not the only, we're not the only people collecting this data. So the Colorado Department of Education has actually recently started polling families as they're identified as experiencing homelessness. And what they know is that families, by and large, as well as unaccompanied homeless youth, experience homelessness because of eviction, foreclosure, or their inability to afford housing. And that's 2 times any other reason that they identify as experiencing homelessness. The other thing that we know that's economic is a lost job or inability to find work, particularly at a living wage. So, we talk about living wages, we talk about housing wage. The housing wage in the Metro Denver region is about $25 an hour, which most people do not make. And so it's very difficult to secure housing if you are underemployed or unemployed, or you don't make a housing wage. The next cause is relationship or family breakup. So this is really predominant, particularly when we're talking about families. So we have families, individuals fleeing domestic violence. We also have overrepresentation of the LGBTQ youth. And so that is really, a lot of times youth are asked to leave the home, or there's so much abuse or violence in the home, they feel that it's actually safer to live outdoors or leave the home and unfortunately enter homelessness. The other thing that, I don't think a lot of people know and that we don't talk about a lot is that over 66% of people experiencing homelessness also report a history of trauma. And so, trauma is a root cause of a lot of the other things that we see as people experience homelessness. So just, again, reinforcing that there are experiences, particularly trauma, that is consistent among people experiencing homelessness. Next slide, please. Okay, so I've talked a lot about data. We're going to talk a lot about data today. I obviously can't cover that in just a few minutes. I do encourage you to take a look at the NBHI website where we have the full state of homelessness report. We also have an interactive point-in-time dashboard where you can actually play with the point-in-time data yourself. And so I would, encourage you to dig deeper into this. And I will say, while data is really crucial in understanding this issue, it's just as crucial to remember that behind each and every one of these numbers is a person. So often we speak of the homeless as if we can define them, everyone without a home, as a homogenous group. The reality is homelessness is a spectrum. I want to speak to you as someone who's been through homelessness myself. For each of us who's endured this experience, I'm here to tell you, we are not all the same. If you've met one person experiencing homelessness, you've met one person experiencing homelessness. We are individuals with different barriers, different journeys, and different needs. I can also tell you that homelessness is not a choice. It's not the result of our mistakes, our personal flaws. It's often the color of our skin, our histories of trauma, our disabilities, or our misfortune of being born into a certain station in life. Falling into homelessness comes down to one simple fact: how far you have to fall. For some, it's a long way down. For others, it's a much shorter journey. Thank you. Zach, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thanks so much, Jamie. So I really appreciate it. Next, we're going to hear from my Division of Housing colleague, Allison George, Director of the Division of Housing.
Thank you, Zach, so much. It has been an eye-opening day already, and I'm so happy to be here and really appreciate MDHI's leadership in organizing this and bringing everyone together. So my name is Allison George. I'm the Director for the Division of Housing in the Department of Local Affairs at the state. We do everything from emergency shelter assistance all the way through down payment assistance and housing support all the way in that continuum. We do this through 4 different offices. The office that I'm going to highlight today is our Office of Homeless Initiatives. And we have a few representatives from our Office of Homeless Initiatives that I would like to introduce. One, you just heard from Zach Schaffner. He is our Manager of Supportive Housing Services. And so thank you so much, Zach. Our Director of our Office of Homeless Initiatives is Kristen Toombs, and I see Kristen right there. Thank you, Kristen. So happy to have you leading these efforts for us at the state. And then I also saw that Carla Colonives also signed in. So Carla is one of our homeless program specialists. So thank you, Carla, for all the great work that you do. What I really want to focus on, though, is partnerships. Not only data, but how we use those partnerships to make decisions. And so, Zach, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you so much. So at the state level, we're here to support our local partners, but we do that through the many different safety net things that need to be addressed. You know, we talked about that housing is the foundation for a person's safety, health, and well-being. Well, that starts at birth and it goes through aging adults and everything in between. And so we have partnerships with the Department of Education, housing youth that are identified as homeless. We have partnerships with DOC, people re-entering from corrections, from our jails. But the partnership that I really wanted to highlight at the state level is our partnership with Human Services and Healthcare Policy and Financing. So this fall, or last fall, we are really pleased to release a playbook, Making Homelessness History in Colorado. And so this playbook has a series of guiding principles, key goals, cross-cutting approaches, and proven solutions in addressing homelessness. And so Zach, could you please put the link to that in our chat? I'd love for folks to have an opportunity to take a look at that. And it really comes down to that housing is that building block that people need in order to have the foundation for stability. So looking at these different systems, looking at the different partnerships that we have around the state, it comes down to systems and people not being caught in that safety net when there's a family crisis, when there's a personal crisis. Jamie talked about sometimes people have farther to fall because they have that support. And some people don't have that safety net. And so it's these systems that looking at these systems, how we can best support people in their time of crisis. And really the intent is that we want to create a future that homelessness is rare and brief, and when it occurs, because we do know that it's going to occur, but that no one's left behind because that safety net is so strong between our different systems that we can support people in times of crisis. Zach, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. And so my next two slides actually are snapshots from this playbook, really focusing on these key goals to stop homelessness before it starts, identify individuals at risk and ensure they are safe, connect people with supports they need quickly to exit homelessness, create access to those long-term structural solutions. The issues of homelessness are complex and they're based on the individual's needs. And so we need to be looking across all of these systems to figure out how we can best support people. Next slide, please. So with this playbook, communicating what we know are the proven solutions. And so when you're looking at the playbook, I want to make sure that you know that on page 4 of the playbook, you can see the examples of each of these solutions that currently exist in Colorado with the information on the entities that were involved. So these preventions, these solutions are focused on prevention and diversion, anti-poverty supports, coordinated entry systems, street outreach, low barrier shelters, making sure you're meeting people where they are, supportive housing, rapid rehousing, affordable rental housing, even home ownership supports. It's about meeting people where they are and what their needs are. With this slide, I particularly want to point out street outreach, because you think about the stability. What creates that stability? Community. It's not just a roof. It's about having support. It's about having that trust with individuals, other human beings. And so with consistent street outreach, making that connection, you build that trust. You know what the needs of Alice and George are, so that those supports can best be provided to that person. And I just used myself as an example, but it is important to make those connections on the individual level because each of our needs are different. Next slide, please. So with this, I wanted to talk about what we're doing at the state level. So we do have these partnerships across department, but that's the state level. It all happens at the local level. And so we're trying to support local efforts around the state. So MDHI is a part of a continuum of care, or it is a continuum of care. We have continuum of care all across the state. Okay, so we have had historically 3 continuum of care. Recently, there was another one that was created, but the balance of state is what I'd like you to focus on. We have 64 counties in the state of Colorado, and everything on the left and everything on the right and all around was considered balance of state. That is a challenging thing to do in managing and supporting people at the local level. And so we have been supporting the creation of these regional approach for the continuum, particularly with the balance of state, bringing the different service providers together, the housing providers together to provide those supports within that continuum and be able to communicate through data. Next slide, please. So I can remember when I started at the state over 10 years ago now, we had the 3 continuum of care, and we had 3 different homeless management systems. So this is where we collect data, and they were very challenging and very difficult to use. And so a few years ago, the state through DOLA supported the effort to create one data management system, co-HMIS. And so now the state of Colorado, through all of the continuum of care, use the same data management system. And what that allows us to do is through these different regions, through the different continuum of care, it allows us to understand what those needs are. Like Jake was saying, you can tell when your inflow and your outflow is changing, when you have different pressure points, and it helps you to be more responsive to what your needs are. So we've been very pleased with the rollout of co-HMIS, and we're continuing to support these efforts and really appreciate MDHI's leadership in helping manage that data system for all of the continuum of care, actually. So they're supporting all of them, even though there's administrative support at each local level. Next slide, please. So lastly, I want to focus on our potential successes from this. This is one thing that we're really excited about. Colorado almost has its first community that will be certifying its functional zero for veteran homelessness. And so the certification process, it takes 3 months. And we're hoping that the announcement can happen next month. So I'm not going to tell you which community this is, but we're really excited that hopefully next month we will be making an announcement for Colorado's first community reaching functional zero for veteran homelessness. Now, someone had asked why veterans. I will just mention that the VA has done a great job with data. And so historically, it's been one of our best resources for understanding those inflows, those outflows, what the impact and the needs of veterans are. So kudos to the VA. But then also there's been a lot of support through VASH vouchers and others, other financial systems for veterans, for the people that have served our country. And so I just wanted to highlight that and share my appreciation. So as we look at the issues around homelessness around the state, regionally, in the Denver metro area. It's important that we keep our eyes wide open. But you need to know and understand what you're looking at. And you can only do that with the data. It's the best way we can serve people. So thank you very much. Thank you, Zach.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Allison. We really appreciate it. All right. So next, we are going to hear from Missy Mish with the Eastern Colorado Veterans Administration.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Missy Mish, and I'm a social worker with the VA Eastern Colorado Healthcare System. And my team really focuses on outreach and engagement for veterans who are homeless. And so what we find is our veterans do really live regionally. They don't confine themselves to our city and county borders and to specific communities. And as much as we've talked a lot about data, and data informs a lot of our work, every day I remind myself that behind data are stories of individual peoples and individual families. And that really remains our focus. And so to just kind of end this section, we just wanted to put kind of a pseudo face on who we're talking about when we talk about people experiencing homelessness. And so our program worked with a veteran and his wife and their young son. And they were living in their own apartment in Brighton for nearly 10 years. When back in 2017, the wife and the husband both lost their job within a really pretty short period of time. And they weren't able to maintain their apartment that they had lived in. So they quickly left that apartment, moved in with the mother-in-law up in Broomfield, and stayed with her in Broomfield as long as they could. And after probably about a year, that relationship really became strained, and the family ended up couch surfing with friends of theirs that lived both in Arvada as well as in Brighton. Stayed there for a while in Arvada and Brighton, and then they were lucky enough to gain a spot at the Family Motel, which is in Denver, where they received some case management. They were able to stay there for a couple of months as they figured out what their next steps were, tried to secure employment. Then they were able to move into the transitional housing program called Almost Home, which is back up in Brighton. And from the Almost Home transitional housing program, they got, again, more case management, were able to secure jobs, and they moved into their own apartment also in Brighton in about February of 2019. So after this long journey, they finally got back into their apartment. And then, as we all know, in 2020, a pandemic hit, right? So both the veteran and their wife, again, lost their employment and income and subsequently lost that apartment. So they entered into a program called SSVF, which stands for Supportive Services for Veteran and Families. It's a VA granted program out to community agencies, namely locally, it's Volunteers of America and Rocky Mountain Human Services. And so they worked with one of our SSVF partners and got put into an emergency hotel, which we were able to do during this last year. They got increased funding. They placed this family into an emergency hotel here in Denver. And they started working again with the VA and our program to get into what's called a grant and per diem transitional housing program. There are programs funded by the VA across the metro area that reserve beds for veterans and their families to be able to stay in and access transitional housing and case management. So they got onto the waiting list to get into a program called Comitis in Aurora. And while they were on that waiting list, they were actually matched through our One Home Coordinated Entry program and through our Veteran by Name list. They were matched to a permanent supportive housing program, specifically for veterans who aren't eligible for health care. And so they were matched to this program, brand new building out in Fitzsimmons that is specifically serving veterans. And so they were able to access permanent housing last month at this specific unit out at Fitzsimmons in Aurora. And so as you can see by the graphic that Zach has up on the screen, you can see the journey that this family has had over the last couple of years, dealing with housing instability, from really a regional lens. They have been through the entire regional area just trying to keep their family housed. So with that, I'm going to turn that back over to you, Zach.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Busy. All right, so now we are going to open it up for a Q&A. So a question that's been coming up through the chats is around this question of why starting with veteran homelessness. And so I think if folks are okay, Ian with Community Solutions, Ian Fletcher with Community Solutions, if you're able to respond live for folks on the phone, that would be terrific.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Ian Fletcher. I'm the Systems Transformation Advisor, which is basically a coach specifically for Metro Denver. And I'm working with a number of the localities on this very question, right? What happens when maybe you only have 5 veterans experiencing homelessness in your community, but when you look at your total homeless population, you have a lot more. So we're simultaneously both, continuing the work to end veteran homelessness, because that's one of our proven models. But the whole idea is that this is replicable for all populations. And so, especially for communities that have smaller total homeless populations, we can really accelerate that to create a by name list for all people experiencing homelessness. So, a great example would be in Broomfield. They've got about 200 people experiencing homelessness. So that's a manageable number that we could start to really look at, not just veterans who maybe make up maybe 10 of those, but how do we create these systems and build in the infrastructure to be able to address this for everyone.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Ian. I really appreciate it. So we had another question that came in through the Q&A function from Julia Marvin. How can we best reach folks who are experiencing homelessness, but they may not meet that HUD definition of homelessness? So they may be couch surfing or staying with friends and family. Maybe they're staying in a car that would be meeting the HUD federal definition of homelessness, but they're not experienced unsheltered or street homelessness. So Jamie, I'm wondering if you'd be able to take that question.
Sure, absolutely. I really appreciate that question. I'm the former state coordinator for homeless education. So when we're talking about, youth and families that are couch surfing or staying with others, it's just something I've spent a lot of time thinking about. One of the things that this work does, and Jake talked about this a little bit, was talking about inflow and outflow. And so one of the things that we try to do with this model of Built for Zero and the work that we've really seen even through recent kind of federal resources that are being allocated is prevention work. So we have prevention to make sure that people living in those situations don't fall into the HUD definition of homelessness. And the other thing that I would say is that there are those resources, and there's also things like, at MDHI, we have the Housing Stability Flex Fund. And that's a last resort for individuals who may not be eligible for other programs or other types of assistance that have other restrictions on them. And so setting up or providing resources at the local level or the regional level for kind of flexible stability funding is really critical in this work to preventing as well as rehousing individuals and families.
Terrific. Thanks, Jamie. So I think we have time for just a few more questions. And then I do want to make sure we have time for a break for folks to get up and stretch their legs. So if folks can just put those questions in the chat. I think we had one question around the percentage of the homeless population that's made up of veterans. I know that's tricky, right? Depending on which data source you're using. I'm curious, for the folks at MDHI, can you speak to the number of veterans represented in HMIS as compared to non-veterans potentially? And I'm not sure if that's a question best for Ian or Jamie or somebody else at the MDHI team. If we need to get an exact number, that may take a minute, but just want to check if folks are comfortable maybe answering that in a few minutes, if that's okay.
Yeah, I wonder, Rebecca, Matt, please chime in on this, and I can pull the exact numbers. I think that's the beauty of having real-time live data. And what I'll do is actually pull that data for us. We have a dashboard, if you will, that tells us that. And I'll go ahead and put that in the chat. I just don't want to keep you all huddled up while I look for that data, but I can give you an exact number of how many people in 2020 that accessed HMIS were veterans.
So we'll get that in the chat. So great. So I want to go ahead and just, again, in my timekeeper responsibilities, I want to give us a 5-minute break or a 10-minute break, apologies. So if we can come back at 10:05, that would be phenomenal. If folks want to stay on and ask questions, our panelists will still be available to answer those after the break. But we'll plan to come back at 10:05. Thanks, everybody. Hi, everybody. So we're going to get going in about 2 minutes here. For folks who are already back, who are timely, we are going to have another poll question. So that'll be coming in as folks come back. But again, don't run towards your computer if you're in the other room. You have about 2 more minutes. Just wanted to give folks a heads up. All right, and then for folks who are already back, just we're going to be getting going in the next minute or so. Just a reminder, if you have questions, please feel free to continue to use the Q&A. If you'd like participants and panelists to be able to see that, you're also welcome to send messages directly to panelists using the chat function. The Q&A is a little bit easier for our panelists to go ahead and answer. So if you can use that, terrific. We appreciate it. So again, we've got this poll in progress. It looks like we've still got plenty of folks to vote on what does that Colorado HMIS system or the Homeless Management Information System assist with. So folks can go ahead and continue to respond there. And then we'll get going in just a minute here. All right, so I want to be sensitive to everyone's time, and I'm going to go ahead and get us going. One of my computers says 10:05, so I'm going to call it time at that. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Leslie Wise with Community Solutions to talk about why Built for Zero works.
Great. Wonderful. I think you can move the slide forward if you don't mind. Hi, everybody. My name is Leslie Wise. I live and work here in Los Angeles. Actually, Jake, I work with Jake directly, and he lives down the street. So every once in a while, we get to see each other from a distance, of course. So my responsibility today is to tell you a little bit more about Built for Zero, maybe pull the curtain back a little bit more to tell you about the methodology and the approach that we take with the communities we work with, and hopefully shed some light on the experience that leaders in Metro Denver are having as part of their involvement in that movement. You can move the slide. So right now there's more than 85 communities across the country really working to redefine what's possible in a movement focused on a measurable end to homelessness for several subpopulations that I'll talk about here in just a second. You can move on. I think it's important to talk about our results to start with. I think it's probably fair to say that most people across the country find it hard to believe that a measurable end to homelessness is possible. I want to start by saying it actually is. And in fact, 13 communities that are a part of this movement have either ended veteran or chronic homelessness and have sustained that measurable end state over time. But maybe most important is the fact that those leaders, those committed leaders, the result of ending homelessness is actually ending the experience of homelessness for over 126,000 individuals. That is why we do this work and why we are driving with such urgency. You can move on. I wanted to provide just a snapshot quickly of the types of communities that make up this movement. There are small communities in rural areas to medium-sized continuums of care to large metropolitan cities and regions participating in this movement. I'm going to talk a bit more in just a second about the different approach that we're taking with large metropolitan regions like Metro Denver in just a second. You can move on. So the first thing that we do, and Jake may have touched on these things, I'll kind of quickly go through the next several slides, but the first thing that we do with communities that are interested in joining this national movement is talk about and have them commit to a very clear end state. I want to talk briefly about what this means for the subpopulations of focus for Built for Zero. You can move on to the next slide. We've talked a lot about today, and we'll continue to talk about veterans. As part of Built for Zero, communities can choose to focus their collective efforts on a measurable end state for veterans homelessness or chronic homelessness. We don't do this because we think veterans or chronically homeless individuals are more deserving than other subpopulations. We did this when we launched the Built for Zero initiative to align with a national movement that at the time was driven by the Obama administration, a really important call to action across the nation coming out of that administration, focused on measurably ending veteran homelessness or chronic homelessness, and then all homelessness. So we designed this Built for Zero movement to be the operating mechanism to see an end state of that proves that vision true, as originally called upon by the Obama administration. We've come to believe, though, that it's really important to use the by name list data that I'll talk about here in just a bit more to prove for various subpopulations first that it is possible, that this organizing methodology, the system improvement that we embed into the movement can actually prove successful for one subpopulation to then drive to all populations. So I just want to be clear, it's not a matter of deserving or a firm commitment to one population or the other. It's an ability to prove that it is indeed possible for a subpopulation and then scale that learning and that method to other subpopulations in an effort to end homelessness for all subpopulations there forward. So we can move on to the next slide here. So after communities clearly at all levels of leadership commit to one end state, it is time to collect data as the measurement mechanism to understand how close or far, month to month, a community is moving towards that end state, to understand if the system shifts we're making are resulting in the improvement we want to see. So this, and many people have talked about the shift to by name real-time data today. We support communities that are a part of the movement in doing just that. So modifying, improving, shifting their local data management systems to be able to provide this function, understanding every month how many people are coming into their system, inflow, how many people are exiting their system, outflow, so that in any given month, you can understand the number of actively homeless individuals for the subpopulation that community is driving towards on any given month. So thank you for moving the slide. You can actually go to the next one. The third critical element of what we do with all communities participating is we use that data to test ideas that are aligned with driving measurable reductions, and you can move on. Jake talked about the importance of a nimble, integrated team to drive that work. We help communities build that command center approach with all of the cross-sector groups of people required to test ideas and to measure those shifts and the impact on those systems, such that they can see these shifts over time, like are reflected here in this run chart in Chattanooga. This is the command center. This is where we hope every community has a group of people that are paying very, very close attention month to month to these numbers over time and questioning if the numbers are going up and annotating what is happening and what shifts have to be made, and also celebrating success of reduction towards functional zero over time, figuring out how to scale those system shifts to make sure that number continues to go down. So you can move on. The journey of any Built for Zero community participating in this movement looks a little bit like this. A community joins the movement, we focus on that quality data and assembling the team to get to that point where that data is consistent and comprehensive. We then support that team to efforts to reduce to zero, making sure they have the right governance, strong coordinated entry systems to reduce that number over time, training teams and leaders around quality improvement science and how to test ideas aligned with system improvements, and also start to target resources in a really data-driven way. We then support communities in celebrating, hopefully we have done this with 14 communities thus far, an end to homelessness. And we shift, like I said before, the focus of those teams to what are the other subpopulations we can focus on with these tools, capacities, knowledge gained through what we learned in either veteran or chronic homelessness, whatever the first subpopulation of focus is. So I just want to talk briefly about the Built for Zero large city cohort, which you can move on to the next slide if you don't mind. What we soon started to realize as we were seeing success with some of these small and mid-sized communities was that we really felt it important to the credibility of the movement to figure out what it takes to end homelessness in a large metropolitan community. So in March of 2019, we launched the Built for Zero large city cohort. You can move on to the next slide. The idea here, the theory of change, was that we want to discover with a small group of very large cities and the leaders in those cities, what it actually took to build a system comprehensive enough and strong enough to prove an end to veteran homelessness. We decided to pick veteran homelessness as the subpopulation where we could all learn and support each other. We were going to tighten our focus into that subpopulation. We're going to tighten our focus in just working with several communities, and we are going to deepen our support, our Built for Zero support, in helping to guide those reduction efforts towards functional zero for veterans. We made that decision. We looked at the communities we were working with. You can move on to slide 35. We invited several large metropolitan regions to join us, and several said, yes, we want to be a part of that learning community and figure out, with the deepened support from Community Solutions, how to measurably end veterans homelessness. So in March of 2019, you can move on to the next slide, these communities joined that movement, Metro Denver included, and we started figuring out together how we were going to, kind of the steps necessary to achieving functional zero for veterans in Metro Denver in this case. So you can move forward to the next slide. One of the ways we're increasing the support is, you can see me here at the top, I'm the portfolio lead. Well, we have been able to, with the great and very generous support of many of our partners, we've been able to hire full-time systems transformation advisors to cover and support and drive local efforts in those metropolitan regions. You heard from Ian just a bit ago, and he has been hired to really to work on the Built for Zero team, to work on my team, to really guide those efforts locally and to really dig into what is it going to take to build a regional approach to discover local solutions to end veterans homelessness. So Ian's really been digging into both what does that regional infrastructure look like and how do we engage and build community around that regional infrastructure? And then how do we use that regional infrastructure to drive measurable reductions to veterans homelessness? So very focused on veterans homelessness, like I said. All right, so also the increased support that we're providing, you can move on to the next slide, is by networking the communities that are a part of this movement in real-time learning, figuring out what it takes to really target and see improvements in the VASH housing subsidy opportunities, how to best leverage SSVF resources and target those in optimal ways. So it's what we've learned and heard from these leaders in large metropolitan communities that they want to hear and learn from other communities like-sized with those same similar complex systems. So we work very hard as a Built for Zero team and networking those community leaders on topics of relevance and importance to them. You can move forward, if you will. We also spent a lot of time deepening our partnership with the VA at all levels. So at the national level, really deepening our partnerships with them, communicating up the really challenging funding constraints or policy constraints that are being felt at the local level, and figuring out what our policy platform is for modifying those things at the federal level. We spent a lot of time as a team engaging in partnership with regional VA leads. You've heard from the awesome folks locally here today, deepening partnerships with the local VA leaders through the local VA medical centers to work in partnership with them, using data, targeting and improving the way resources are allocated or directed to this initiative. I will say in Metro Denver, that partnership is unprecedented, incredibly healthy, and we are so grateful for that partnership. And finally, really digging into the data, making sure every given month with the 8 communities that are participating as part of the large city effort, we understand the number of veterans coming into the system and exiting the system, and then working collectively to drive reductions over time. Data is very, very important. We remind ourselves always that data is people. These are real veterans who have served our country that we see on these run charts. And that's why we have to bring some urgency to looking at this data, because it is lives, it is real veterans that is behind this data. And that is the urgency by which we approach this problem as part of the large city cohort and as part of this national Built for Zero movement. So that is, I'm sorry, you could go to the next slide. I was talking about data and didn't tell you to forward that slide. I apologize. That's my opportunity to speak with you today. And so I'm happy to turn it over to you, Zach.
Thanks so much, Leslie. And then real quick, before we move on in the agenda, I just want to acknowledge all the different folks who we've had join. So we've got mayors, city managers, city council members, local government staff and leaders, county commissioners, state elected officials, state agencies, federal agencies, and federally elected representatives. So really just an incredible group of folks who have had the chance to join and are participating today and asking some great questions. So next, I'm going to turn it over and sort of answer this question that's come up of why veterans, and turn it over to Michelle Lapido with the VA.
Thank you, Zach, and thanks for reminding me how many people are watching right before I speak. It's a real pleasure to be here today. I'm Michelle Lapidow, and I'm section chief for all the homeless programs within the Eastern Colorado VA, to include all of Metro Denver. So my job today is to talk about why we're proposing to start with veterans. And I just want to start by saying, for any of you who struggle with why veterans, please, when I'm speaking, just imagine any subpopulation, because really any population could fit here. And the idea is that they will fit here at some point. So let's start with the first slide. Actually, one more. Thanks. So I do want to start, though, with a moral obligation to those who served our country. So as we've seen with some of the data, veterans are overrepresented in the homeless population as compared to the overall population. And for many who are veterans who are homeless, the impacts of service carry on long after they leave the military. So that can be due to PTSD, military sexual trauma, or many other reasons. And I don't know that military sexual trauma is something that is talked about in the larger community as much as PTSD, but it's also a very real impact on so many people who have served. And there are really robust programs within the VA to help people who have faced that. But as you can imagine, it's also something people really don't like to talk about. PTSD is a lot more understood and talked about and acceptable, but there are so many factors that go into why military service can impact. Veterans of color are additionally overrepresented among those experiencing homelessness And this overrepresentation can be seen both nationally and locally. So looking at the overall population of veterans experiencing homelessness, we see that just more than half have disabilities, at least half identify with a serious mental illness, and a significant number are age 51 or older when compared to the general population of individuals experiencing homelessness. And that alone has some pretty serious policy and service implications. As those of you who regularly serve homeless know, somebody who is over the age of 55 and homeless is actually much older than somebody who is housed and at that same age. The impacts of homelessness age people tremendously. And next slide. So the second reason is that the resources and infrastructure are in place to serve veterans. Our community has a wealth of specific resources funded for veterans, many with community partners. And importantly, we know who the veterans experiencing homelessness are by name. And that's a small piece of, if you go to the next one, the next slide, you can see that this is a small piece of our by name list that is maintained daily. So the VA has a really wonderful coordinated entry specialist. Her whole job is to work with the community around coordinated entry and keep up on our data. And we can see by month the number of verified active veterans in our community, as well as how many entered and left the homeless service system. So as you've already heard about the inflow and the outflow, we're tracking that for veterans currently. If a veteran is placed with an intervention but returns to homelessness, that's also identified. And we again follow the veteran until they're placed into a new permanent housing placement. So in order to say that we're going to reduce homelessness, we have to have a starting point in order to have that goal. And for veterans, we have that starting point and we know what needs to happen. We also know with our by name list exactly where people are going. So whether that is transitional housing or permanent housing, or one of the interventions for rapid rehousing through our SSVF partners. So if you want to go back one slide, I can talk a little bit about, so I referred a little to our resources and infrastructure in place. The resources really are there already, so that as somebody is identified as a homeless veteran and they go on that by name list, we actually have resources to place them with. So whether that is permanent supported, transitional, or rapid rehousing, we have a lot of resources ready to roll in all of those different areas. And Metro Denver has the 1,240 active HUD-VASH vouchers that are listed there are the ones already in use. We have another 200 looking to become active in the coming year, all for Metro Denver. And another thing that we know is coming, but has not yet really rolled out, is that Congress recently approved the expansion of eligibility criteria for HUD-VASH. So we know that it's likely that we will be able to serve additional veterans who we had not been able to serve in the past. And the final one is that we must start somewhere, right? That's our final reason for veterans, and that we're already partway down the road with our partnerships and our resources and our infrastructure. And one of the important aspects to understand is that all providers in our region are veteran providers. Veterans access supports not just at organizations like ours, but at almost all agencies involved in this work. We have been working together as a region to lay the foundation for this Built for Zero work. And now that our region of providers knows our veterans experiencing homelessness by name, the goal our community has collectively set, utilizing the Built for Zero framework, is to create a 50% reduction in the number of veterans experiencing homelessness by the end of the year. That goal is attainable, and we hope you'll join us in these efforts to make meaningful reductions in homelessness for those that have served our country. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Michelle. We really appreciate it. So next we have another poll. I'm just hoping to keep our audience engaged here. So we'll share that in just a minute here. And again, great use of the chat, folks. Please continue to use that as well as the Q&A. And we'll make sure that we walk through a lot of those, as many as we can for folks who are joining by Facebook Live. So the question for the poll, what is it called when a community knows everyone experiencing homelessness? Inflow, by name list, outflow, or functional zero? And so we'll give that a minute or two, and then we're gonna go into next steps. And thanks to all of our speakers, we are right on schedule. So really appreciate it. And we'll give another minute for that question. All right, so yes, what is it called when a community knows everyone experiencing homelessness? That's the by name list, where we have all of those individuals and information on the potential barriers to housing stability. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca Meyer and Matt Meyer at Metro Denver Homeless Initiative.
Thank you, Zach. Everyone's doing really well with the pop quiz, which is great. So folks know that we've heard today about the need for an equitable response to homelessness, which we can address together through local planning with regional coordination. So we've learned about the Built for Zero framework, the need for quality real-time by name data, and for strong partnerships. Now we're going to provide a really brief overview of how this will look as we implement this local planning with regional coordination for Metro Denver. So MDHI, Community Solutions, and local representatives are working collaboratively right now to stand up local homeless coordination teams. I really want to emphasize that these teams are not meant to and will not supplant local planning that is already happening. We know that there is a great foundation of local homeless planning efforts that are already in place, and some has been happening for years. So we plan to complement and enhance this work that is already being done in the community. Some of our local homeless coordination teams have actually already started to convene, and others are still in the process of being stood up. For an example, we are in conversations with our partners in Adams County, Arapahoe County, and Aurora to determine the best way for those teams to be configured, because we know Aurora really has a lot of local planning going on, their kind of own center of gravity with homeless response. So we're working together to make sure that there's a good customization of how these local teams are set up that makes sense for each community. And then our homeless coordination teams, as I said, some are in place and some are being developed, but they will be kind of finalized over these next several weeks. Next slide, if you could please, Zach. And then one more, if you don't mind. Thank you. So this visual is giving us an overview of how the local homeless coordination teams and a homeless technical advisory committee will interact. And I'm going to briefly describe the homeless coordination teams in a little more detail, and I'm going to turn it over to Matt, who will discuss the other part of this visual. So one more slide, please, Zach. Thank you. So our local homeless coordination teams will be composed of a community lead, a data lead, folks from veteran services, homeless service providers, including outreach, housing authorities, persons with lived expertise, and other key partners. Each of our local groups will also have a designated representative from the MDHI team and a designated improvement advisor from the MDHI and/or Community Solutions, helping to guide and support the work. And then our homeless coordination teams will work to develop that quality local by name list that we talked about, and that will feed up to a regional by name list. The local groups will assess which local programs are reporting data for the by name list and where improvements are needed to ensure that full coverage and good quality data. Each local team will review the data at least monthly, and they're going to work collaboratively to identify housing solutions for persons who are active on that by name list. They're going to work together to adjust and improve those processes to increase housing placements, reduce the time it takes to house individuals on the list, and to ensure racial equity. They will be providing regular updates to local leadership regarding current data, accomplishments, and obstacles where help from local leadership is needed. And so for more on that piece, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Meyer.
Thank you, Rebecca. And so Zach, oh great, you moved the slide. So what we're now looking at is the technical advisory committees. And what you can see is that we're we're taking the concept from community solutions of the nimble command center and then applying it in our local context of what makes sense here in Metro Denver, and how can we build that within a framework of some existing models for how we've done this. We're going to do this through in partnership with Dr. Cog, who has applied this sort of sub-regional approach in the Metro Denver region around transportation. And we're going to take it and build sort of mirror that structure to address homelessness. So in doing that, what we've done is we've taken the framework of the technical advisory committees and we're building that out to look at homelessness by including the city and county managers, various appointees that could include municipal elected officials, county supervisors and council members, and so on, into this larger group that's going to focus on some of the systemic issues that the coordination teams may be encountering that are beyond their ability to address. Things like maybe zoning issues, long-term housing inventory, various issues around the renters' rights, and those kinds of issues. So what you see is that we have an overlap between the two committees that include the community lead, the housing authorities, data lead, the MDHI staffing, so that we create continuity between these two groups. And at a certain point on a regular basis, these groups will be coming back together and working with the sub-regional forums to keep them informed, but also to be enlisting their support in moving various initiatives forward to address homelessness. This will create a much more ongoing and engaged feedback loop, so that we're not coming back to homelessness saying like, have we done anything? Like everyone's going to know what's going on around homelessness in an ongoing way. So from that, can we go to the next slide? Yeah, so this is what we've been talking about, just focusing on this side, the technical advisory committee. And so we just want to really enlist the support of the folks on this call. If we have these groups already working, if there are parallel processes in your community, existing work groups, task force, and so on, the purpose here is not for us to recreate that or create a redundant process, but rather come alongside the existing process and adjust to what you guys are doing in your community, but build on that, provide more support, and allow for the regional coordination. So what's going on in local communities can be coordinated and aligned to the issues that are happening and the approaches that are being taken in surrounding communities and throughout the region to maximize our impact. Next slide. So what's happening now, what you're going to see is that we're going to go on the next day, coming out of this meeting, we're going to stand up the remaining homeless coordination teams throughout the region. So we have these set up in many locations and communities, but not everyone. So if you don't know of one that's going on in your community, let us know. We think we're aware of the communities that still need to have them stood up, but we're open to hearing from more communities, and we'll sit down and work out how we can set that up that makes sense or come alongside existing structures. Then we're going to create the tax and the sub-regional forums to mirror the existing transportation framework. And we're going to continue to engage with additional nonprofits and other organizations to provide particularly those serving the BIPOC community. So what we recognize is, throughout the region, there may be, and this might be some of the questions that were coming up earlier around how are we going to do effective outreach, particularly effective outreach in those communities. How can we enlist the organizations and entities that are currently doing that work and invite them into the work that we're doing and to join us on this effort. Next slide. Great. Thank you, Zach.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Matt and Rebecca. Next, I'm going to turn things over to Englewood Mayor Linda Olson. Mayor Olson, are you there? Oh, and we've still,
I am. Came just a little fast. Good to see everybody. Thank you to all of you who have presented this morning. It's been a wonderful set of information and reminders, as well as new perspectives. I wanted to share a little bit about myself. I'm the mayor of Englewood, and we have been involved with a Tri-Cities policy group focused on homelessness for Littleton, Sheridan, and Englewood for the last 2.5 years. And I have learned a great deal from so many of the people who've presented today and others who are listening in today. And I thank you for the way that this has come together. Thank you to the mayors, particularly who met over a year ago and had an idea to do this. And then of course, COVID hit and sort of knocked the plan out a little bit, but here we are together. And I appreciate the initiatives that you all took to make this happen this morning. I wanted to talk, if you, let's see, I've got to find the slides where you are. I'm a little bit out of order here. So go to the next slide. So you might know by my last name that I came from another part of the country, and my little twang once in a while shows through, but I'm a Minnesotan in my early days. And my husband and I had an opportunity to move out here in the early 80s. His job moved him out here and my job allowed for me to do that. And so we made our way out here in the early 80s and looked for a place to live and landed in an apartment in South Denver. Loved our little place. It was a great way to get established in the community, but spent a couple of months looking around to see if we could afford a house somewhere. And we looked and looked and looked, and sadly could not find an affordable house for us on our limited, we both worked for nonprofits at the time. And we ended up moving to Aurora, as far out in Aurora as you could possibly live in the early 80s, which was on Parker, on Chamber, about 2 miles west of Parker, which now is totally on the east side or the west side of Aurora. Anyway, we found this wonderful little house, moved in, enjoyed it, made friends in that area. Now we had friends in Denver and we have friends in Aurora. And after about 5 years of having to travel into the city for my job and starting a family, we decided we needed a little bigger house. So we went looking around again, hoping we'd find something a little further into the core of the metro area. And lo and behold, we found an affordable house in Englewood. And so we became Englewood residents. So now we had friends in Denver, friends in Aurora, and new life in Englewood. I tell you this story because that's a privilege that we have of being able to move throughout the community to find the best housing we can find. And when I think about those that are unhoused, they're no different than any of us are. They're always moving to find the best possible place to live and find the amenities that they need to live. The difference is that some of us have the privilege and the affordability to move from one place to the other and find something better, or to find something that works for whatever it is that we're trying to meet the need on. And that kind of thinking about homelessness in the metro area has helped remind me of our commonality within the human life and opportunities and actually the human condition even that we are in as we have to find places to live. Let's move to the next slide. So I'm a professor. A lot of people know this about me, but I'll try not to bore you with this. But there are a number of people who write and research around homelessness in particular, but as a social issue, as a major, very difficult thing to solve socially. Keith Grint is one out of England, Cranfield University, who's done quite a bit of research around how social problems get solved, how change happens. And I'm sure you've heard these concepts before, but wicked problems are one of the things he's focused on, many researchers do, and how do we find solutions for them. And he's written a couple of articles about wicked problems, tame problems, and critical problems. And the wicked and tame are really helpful for me when I think about homelessness and what we're trying to do here today. Wicked problems are those which really are so complicated and so complex that there's no one solution. Whereas tame problems, they're pretty straightforward. They might be complicated. I'm thinking with Mayor Terabyte Floor from Sheridan, our sinkhole on the border between Englewood and Sheridan. That was a complicated problem we had to solve. We had this major sinkhole, lots of problems with getting to and from both cities and transportation, and it was expensive, but we knew what we had to do. It was pretty clear and straightforward. That's a tame problem, but a wicked problem is one that doesn't have an easy answer like that. And so we search for all kinds of solutions, and we often spin our wheels, and we don't realize that the answers are there if we can break it down, but they require radical collaboration. All of us have to come to the table to make it work. And the complicated nature of it is that we have various voices that need to be at the table in order to solve it well together. So that's why I appreciate this morning. We've got a good start with a lot of different voices at the table. We need to have those who are experiencing homelessness to be at the table as well, various levels of economic needs at the table as well. And I appreciate many of the agencies represented here who really do pull them together, all of us together. So the last thing, and we can move on to the next slide, is this concept of being a neighbor. So when I think about moving within the metro area, in my experience, and now that I have friends all over the metro area, it does call me to ask, who is my neighbor? And when I talk with people in my community who think there should be simple solutions to homelessness and want to blame certain populations for why they're there, I'm interested in those conversations. I think they help us get at what is going on and why we have a hard time solving things and helping people find their way out. But I also think it begs the question of what our responsibility is as neighbors. So am I going to worry about homelessness in Aurora? You bet I am, because I've lived there. I know people there. I realize that it impacts the lives of people in that community, just as it does in Englewood and just as it does in Denver, and it does in the north and the east and the south. So I ask myself, who is my neighbor? And for those of us that might come from faith traditions where that's a pretty common thing, I think of the Abrahamic covenant religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all talk about, welcoming the stranger, welcoming the homeless, and then ask the question, who's my neighbor? And I think that's the question we also have to ask ourselves. But Mr. Rogers did it best. And if I could put on a little sweater and zip it up, I would ask us all to think about who are our neighbors, those who are housed, those who are unhoused, those who are veterans or not veterans, and the various groups within those that are unhoused. And consider ourselves neighbors in figuring out how do we work together as neighbors to solve a problem that is a wicked, or what I'd prefer to call a grand challenge of the social life that we live in today, and join together. And so I'd go ahead and put up the next slide. We have a pledge here. And this pledge really is about, and if you can click on it so they can all see the actual pledge, and I'll read it through with you. This is a pledge to regional coordination to combat the complexity and the complicated nature of this by working together. So by signing this pledge, we would be committing to building sustaining a new future where homelessness is rare and brief, and a moral and public health imperative that is necessary for an equitable future. Your community, our community, is part of MDHI's Built for Zero region. And as a community leader, you play a critical role in ensuring our local efforts are part of regional coordination. And Built for Zero communities take strides toward that future by reaching functional zero for one population at a time. In my community, it won't be necessarily veterans particularly, because there are very few, but we will work on chronic homelessness until they've reached this a milestone for all. So join your fellow officials in pledging to make this work forward as a region. So we're going to start filling in my information here. So by pledging, you are saying homelessness is an issue we should address as a community and together. We're all our neighbors. And we see work that makes sense to coordinate and achieve as a region, as homelessness does not end at a city or a county border. The coordination with the Metro Denver Homeless Initiative on Built for Zero is how my community can help coordinate its local planning on homelessness regionally to generate reductions in homelessness. And I commit to help paving the way for this work to continue at the local level. This may look like encouraging my community to utilize the homeless management information system, which will help us all get to the real-time data, participating in or appointing a designee, local briefing groups, or helping remove barriers to the work. So I invite you all today to join me as I'm filling this out, to sign the pledge, to find ways to work together, and to find those tame problems within the larger grand challenge and take them one by one where we do know we have some data oriented solutions, where we can make some difference together so that corporately all together, the larger Denver metro neighborhood actually can make a difference in all of this. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to join in with the rest of you in doing this.
All right, so folks, the link to the pledge has been shared in the chat. You can grab it there. So if anybody else needs that, please let us know. But Jamie has shared that link in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and then also pull us back up on our slides. One other thing that we're encouraging folks to do as part of your participation in this convening is to share your pledge on social media. And so really quickly, let me just share that. So we're using the hashtag Metro Denver Pledge. And then for folks who are on social media, I'll just share, there's some sample tweets that have already been shared. So here's one that I've drafted, right, based on the language that MDHI has shared. I know drafting tweets, even though there's more characters than there were before, can still be tricky. So the example here is addressing homelessness across Metro Denver will take leadership and strong partnerships. I join my colleagues to pledge to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring across our region. Hashtag Metro Denver Pledge, hashtag Built for Zero. So this is the image, one of a few different images that the folks at MDHI have put together, indicating that you have taken the pledge. So you're welcome to do that if you're interested. And then I'll go ahead and you'll stop seeing what Twitter is targeting me for in my ads. So just folks, go ahead and do that. And then I'm gonna go ahead and turn things back over to Matt Meyer with MDHI to provide our closing remarks for today.
Thanks, Zach. And thank you, Mayor Olson. Very much appreciate you walking through the pledge with everybody. So it looks like we're going to be able to give everyone back about a half an hour of their day. Thank you. Thank you for spending time with us on this. We invite you to sign the pledge and help spread the word about this regional coordination. After the conclusion of this event, attendees will receive an email with the direct link to the pledge, as well as ideas on how to share your commitment to regional coordination via social media. We hope you'll join your fellow elected officials in working together on addressing homelessness. Because together, homelessness is a solvable issue. It's not something your city, your counties, or even the region can solve in isolation. By working together, we can move further, faster. We can make data-driven decisions, see what's working, and identify what's needed to create meaningful progress. Again, we'd like to thank you for being with us today and for each and every partner that made today possible. Today is just the beginning of this work, and we appreciate you being a critical piece in this work together. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to all of our presenters, all of our panelists, all of the elected officials throughout the region who have joined us, to all of you on our live stream via Facebook. Thank you guys for being here and for your concerns and interest in being part of the solution to homelessness in our region. Thank you very much.